Are scientists with the biblical text headed for a collision course? If you listen to much of the rhetoric that comes out of the media every day, that's the assumption that one would come up with. That you have science over here on the one hand, most of them of which would be of the evolutionary stripe of thought. And one would think that most creationists or religionists, not in the same camp always, would look at the biblical text and say, God went ibbity-bobbity-boo, and instantaneously there was a creation. There is a difference in emphasis between the camps, for sure. The Hebrew term bara may include previously existent material, and God acts as the great master potter of Isaiah's imagery to bring creation about. The book of Genesis, as Dr. Sorensen has written, is that of a cosmic temple text. This temple text is more about religion. The temple, as it functions in heaven in God's sphere, in the heavenly sanctuary, versus what we create here on earth. And that's why the timekeeping piece, whether or not it was the pyramid, or whether or not it was a temple, had a cosmological section to it that promoted the cycle of worship on divine liturgical time. And so it wasn't always linear in the way that seven-day creationists try to take the biblical text and say, well, 6 days of creation and on the Sabbath he rested had to be tied to 24-hour periods, even though the term day yom in the Hebrew tongue has 6 different meanings and many different shades of meaning. But nevertheless, the biblical text is not a book of science. It is not trying to make scientific declarative statements. It's a book about the history and the worship of divinely called people through salvation history. So it's trying to give us a salvific view of what God does in the cosmos and how that affects us on earth. That is hardly a scientific approach. So if we're looking at Jastrow or the writings of Carl Sagan or some of the great evolutionary debates of our time in Darwin's black box from a creation design, type of an approach, there's a lot of misunderstanding, not only in regards to what science was supposed to be, was a test tube approach. In other words, you have a hypothesis, and of course you test it. The difficulty with biblical science is, number one, you have no worldwide test bench. So we cannot test the origins of Earth in a laboratory. Yes, we try to look back and we try to understand the age of primordial soup and how creation may have happened. There are special creationists among us who try to say that it was 999th billionth to the trillionth power that it would have taken Yahweh to create the exact conditions by which heaven and earth came to existence. One thing is for sure, it's pretty miraculous. And we know with Einstein's laws of physics that one could stand in one place, and with the curvature of light rays, if you went out far enough in our solar system, some theorists say that you would end up in the same spot eventually due to the curvature of the light spectrum or of electricity or of the molecular structure itself. Whether or not this is true can be debated, but one thing is for sure, that we live in a highly complex universe. And we go through periods of scientific endeavor that suggest, these protons and neutrons are acting at random. And then other times with the decoding of information, there's a wonderful book out of Germany called In the Beginning Was Information, that now seems to be doing away with the random theories of electron and their movement, but seems to show that with the study of quarks and other molecular structures, that creation has a blueprint within itself. We know this is true of the mitochondrial DNA studies that contain information that are passed on from one generation to another. It has been said that you take one cell from a human being and there's the blueprint of all that person is throughout their body. And of course, now we're jumping in to each cell containing memory. So where will this stop? We have no idea. But to me, that's sparks of a wonderful creator to bring these unfoldings of science and of our molecular structure out in the open for us to deal with. I can't for the life of me see how this disproves a creator or how he has structured our world. But I guess we're not going to solve that anytime soon. We can make reasonable arguments and reasonable assumptions. And we can have working hypotheses that may or may not be accepted by one and all. One of the things we fight about now in the academic world, and special creationists have jumped on this bandwagon. How do we read the fossil record? How do we read the geological record? Well, it looks old. And it's certainly a stretch when young earthers tend to say, well, God just made it look old. Well, if that is the test pilot, then you can't believe anything that you see or examine, because there could be a different layer behind it. I think that hypothesis is ridiculous. But let us continue. Where is our starting point? It seems the evolutionist feels that creation is indeed moving forward. Theistic evolutionists feel the same. Many young earthers tend to feel that creation is winding down, and so therefore it couldn't last for trillions or billions of years, in the future. And they try to explain that through laws such as entropy and other natural laws. But once again, I go back to my original preface that we have no worldwide methods of testing the entire creation, as Professor Lloyd Jensen used to say at the University of Washington. And so therefore, we can't run the proper experimentation that is needed to answer these type of questions. And I think he's spot on there. And I think that's something that we need to go back to. Others have suggested, well, aren't these discussions a part of biblical faith? And I think that's accurate. That's a fair statement. But it doesn't mean that biblical faith is opposed, or should be, to open scientific inquiry. Today we are trying to have spirituality without God. Today the new trend is to say, well, I'm a spiritual being, but I have no driver in my life. There's no cosmic purpose that is beyond myself, who is in control of my destiny. How dangerous. What a dilemma we are placing ourselves. It's like trying to say, well, I have a car, I don't have a driver, but as the Beatles used to say, well, that's a start. Well, that's true. Spirituality for its own sake can lead one to marvelous personal discoveries. But ultimately, without God, as Desmond Ford has said, if our beginnings are truly a zero, then everything else along the way is also a zero. So I think we need to be very careful about what we ask for. We just might get it. What if there is a creator, and I truly believe there is, who reveals himself to the cosmos in the latter times? Well, what kind of fools have we made of ourselves academically, if this is indeed true? You see, the modern approach to this phenomenon is that religious people are elementary, that we are from an ancient belief from times past, that we're no longer relevant, that we're no longer as sophisticated, that this is for the old world. Well, if that assumption is correct, then we might as well stop the discussion right here. If the other side is correct from the household of faith perspective, then we are headed towards barbarism. It is up to you to decide which one of these paradigms you think has more validity. This is Father Tom Roberts saying thanks for listening.